Assalamu alaikum. This is Hena Zuberi, and you're watching Muslim Network News. Our top story today is about another mass shooting in the United States. A gunman killed 8 before killing himself near Indianapolis Airport. This was the 45th mass shooting in the United States in the last 30 days. The shooting took place at a FedEx airport facility. Several others were wounded. Police were called to the facility late Thursday night. The 19-year-old killer is named Brandon Scott Hole of Indiana. His relatives have informed law enforcement that he might resort to violence. President Biden says we can and must do more to stop gun violence. No motives are known as yet. As gun violence continues to rise in the United States, the biggest challenge for current administration is gun control. In tonight's show, we will bring an in-depth analysis on this issue. Our next story is about the ongoing vaccination drive against coronavirus and the need for a booster. Pfizer says a third booster shot may be needed to prolong its COVID vaccine's effectiveness. CEO Albert Bourla said it's likely the booster will be needed within 12 months of receiving your first shot. He also said that people will need to get vaccinated annually to protect against COVID. Researchers are not sure how long protection lasts for both the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines. Pfizer's recommendation is based on data from more than 12,000 vaccinated participants. Moderna's vaccine, which works similar to Pfizer, has also shown to be highly effective at 6 months. While many people can't wait to protect themselves from the virus, some are adamant that they won't be getting the jab, leaving populations divided into those that have been vaccinated and those that haven't. More details in this report by Ali Khalaf and Saliha Farouk.
A recent news report stated that nearly 40% of U.S. Marines are declining COVID-19 vaccinations. 48,000 Marines have chosen not to receive the vaccines. This number is potentially large enough to affect Marine Force readiness. Marine Corps spokeswoman Colonel Kelly Freshour, however, asserted that there are a number of potential reasons why. One possible reason is to allow others to receive the vaccinations first. Last year, a U.S. aircraft carrier deployed in the Pacific faced a high-level COVID-19 outbreak. The United States Armed Forces have approximately 2.2 million service members operating around the globe.
Moving on to the George Floyd murder case, the testimony phase of Derek Chauvin's trial ended yesterday. He's the former Minneapolis officer charged with killing George Floyd last year. The key argument in the case has been the cause of George Floyd's death. 2 medical experts yesterday gave different reasons for how he died. Dr. Martin Tobin, testifying for the prosecution, says Floyd died of low oxygen due to the pressure of Chauvin's weight on his neck. Dr. David Fowler, testifying for the defense, says Floyd suffered a heart arrhythmia due to underlying heart disease. Chauvin has pleaded not guilty and yesterday did not testify, invoking the Fifth Amendment. The trial will resume on Monday with closing arguments. Following that, the jury will sequester for deliberations. Floyd's May 25th death touched off protests nationwide against racism and police brutality. In a number of videos about the incidents from bystanders and Chauvin's body camera, Chauvin, who is white, was seen kneeling on Floyd's neck for more than 9 minutes until he died. Chauvin has been charged with second-degree murder, third-degree murder, and second-degree manslaughter. Another incident of police brutality, but this time in Chicago. Outrage is growing after body cam footage of the shooting of 13-year-old Adam Toledo was released in Chicago yesterday. In the video, he appears to have his hands up, surrendering to police after dropping what seems like a gun behind a wooden fence. He's then shot once in the chest. This contradicts police and city officials' version of what happened during the March 29th shooting. They said Toledo was holding a gun when he ran down the alley as an officer called for him to stop and drop the weapon. Toledo was one of the youngest people killed by Chicago police in years. On Thursday, a handful of protesters gathered in front of Cloud Gate in downtown Chicago's Millennium Park hours after the footage was released. More protests and vigils were planned for today. Now from Washington, D.C. Democrats have advanced a bill that will prevent the United States president from blocking immigrants based on their religion. The bill will revoke former US President Donald Trump's Muslim ban, which restricted entry to the United States from 13 countries, mostly with majority Muslim populations. President Joe Biden revoked the ban on his first day in office, but this legislation bars future presidents from taking similar actions. House Judiciary Committee Chairman Jerry Nadler accused Trump for using flimsy national security concerns as a pretext for imposing a sweeping ban based on religious elements. Republican committee members attempted to amend the bill to preserve a number of Trump's policies, but did not succeed. In January 2017, Trump signed an executive order that banned foreign nationals from seven predominantly Muslim countries. They were not allowed into the country for 90 days. The order also suspended entry of all Syrian refugees indefinitely and prohibited any other refugee from coming into the country for 120 days in January 2017. The ban separated Muslim families across countries and continents, separating parents from children and spouses from one another. According to the Refugee Processing Center, Trump's administration reduced Muslim refugee arrivals by 93% compared to the final months of the former President Barack Obama's administration. According to CNN, President Biden just announced that he will reverse his earlier promises and keep former President Trump's cap of 15,000 refugees per year. Democratic Progressive Representative Alexandria Ocasio Cortez is the latest politician to do an about face on Israel's occupation of Palestine. In discussion with Jewish Community Relations Council of New York, CEO Michael Miller, earlier this month, Ocasio Cortez, while discussing Israel, made vague comments about people's rights without mentioning Israel's role in suppressing those rights. This is in contrast to 3 years ago when she called out Israel's killings of Palestinian protesters in Gaza, and they called it a massacre. A number of leftists have pointed out that this is a pattern among aspiring candidates. Georgia Senator Pastor Raphael Warnock is another example. He had criticized Israel for the 2018 Gaza massacre, saying Israel shoots down unarmed Palestinians like birds of prey. But after winning a Senate seat earlier this year, he has condemned the BDS economic boycott of Israel and has pledged to keep military aid to Israel flowing. The root cause of this shift, the Palestinian activists believe, is campaign financing. Criticism of Israel is considered a sure way to cut off this funding and support. Is your child taking a day off for Eid? Children in Iowa are. One Muslim middle schooler's persistence has caused change to the Iowa City Community School District. Reem Khirja prevailed in her campaign to have Eid al-Fitr and Eid al-Adha included as days off on the district's calendar for the last 3 years. The Iowa City School Board voted to change the 2021 to 2022 academic calendar to include days off on May 3rd for the Muslim holy day of Eid al-Fitr and on September 16th for the Jewish holy day of Yom Kippur. Both the Muslim and Jewish holidays are determined by the lunar cycle and are not necessarily celebrated during the school year. Kidra is an eighth grader and launched her campaign by forming the Ideal Reality Union Club. Her online petition collected nearly 7,000 signatures to support her cause. She said this change would help Muslim students celebrate their faith and promote more diversity and inclusion in the district. China is opening its door to the world for astronomy research. Astronomers living outside China can now submit proposals to use the 500-meter aperture telescope called FAST. This is the world's largest single dish telescope. 10% of the telescope's time will be open to foreign scientists. The move has been especially welcomed by researchers who are relying on the Arecibo Observatory in Puerto Rico. It collapsed last December due to a manufacturing defect. The Arecibo telescope was a 305-meter spherical reflector dish. The loss of the Arecibo radio telescope left astronomers like James Cordes of Cornell University without an instrument to carry on his research on pulsars. These are spinning cores that remain when giant stars explode at the end of their lives. The Chinese telescope will catch the radio waves of these explosions and allow scientists to discover distant galaxies. Speaking of galaxies, it's time for our special Ramadan report. Imagine a drummer waking you up in the middle of the night. The entire neighborhood would chase them out. But this is not the case with the Musaharatis, the Ramadan night drummers. More details in this report by Ali Khalaf, narrated by Saliha Farouk.
The sound of beating drums to wake people up. During regular days, it is impolite to have loud music during the early hours of the day while people are still asleep. Oh, that loving morning sleep, while you cuddle in your bed in the warmth of the comforter all around you. But here comes a drummer. These drummers go around waking people up for a pre-dawn meal. Arabs call this person a Musaharati. However, he has different names. He has the same function. He is a walking drummer. Although everybody has an alarm clock, and some of us have many, this tradition is still alive and well. Wake up! Wake up! All Muslims, wake up! It is time for suhoor.
Thank you, Ali and Saleha, for this upbeat report. Stay tuned for our in-depth analysis. We'll be right back after these messages.
Our fellow Americans.
Right now, the COVID-19 vaccines are available to millions of Americans.
And soon, they will be available to everyone.
The science is clear. These vaccines will protect you and those you love from this dangerous and deadly disease.
They could save your life.
So we urge you to get vaccinated when it's available to you.
That's the first step to ending the pandemic and moving our country forward. It's up to you.
We are Justice for All. Headquartered in the heart of downtown Chicago, Justice for All is a global humanitarian initiative dedicated to raising awareness for human rights concerns impacting vulnerable minority groups. Our diverse team of staff and volunteers, led by Imam Malik Mujahid, work tirelessly to help Justice for All achieve their goals. We promote policies that protect religious freedom, address the root causes of mass displacement, and recognize the plight of refugees and forced migrants. Together, we can continue to stand up for justice. Justice for all.
Dad, they took over my bedroom. Come on, come on. Okay, Dad. 1, 2, 3. Dad! You saved me. Dad?
Are you okay?
I'm fine, dear.
Your hero needs you now, and AARP is here to help. Find the care guides you need at aarp.org/caregiving.
President Joe Biden condemned gun violence as an international embarrassment and announced his first steps to curb the epidemic, quote unquote. What is the current situation and how is the current administration going to tackle this issue? Let's go to Dr. Amina Al-Din for in-depth analysis. Over to you, Dr. Amina.
Thank you, Hena Zuberi. This is Dr. Amin Al-Din, and I have the honor, the absolute honor, to talk with Dr. Spitzer, who is a presidential scholar. He is a constitutional scholar, and he is an expert in the field of all of this stuff we're talking about on gun violence. He's also masquerading as a political scientist. Thank you for being with us. This is such an honor. I can't say, gun violence is just the topic of the day. And as we're having the Chauvin trial, and we just had the shooting the other day of Dante Wright, I think, this is a bit much. And everybody is talking about how do we get the guns out of the hands of civilians. And the president, again, another president, has come up with a way. I'm not too sure about any of those ways. So I'm going to have to listen to you.
Well, thank you. It's nice to be with you. President Biden
sort of drawing in the subject of gun policy and looking at the presidency, I guess my first point is that President Biden is facing a pretty delicate political balancing act right now because the Democrats have very narrow majorities in both houses of Congress, and he has a lot he wants to get done, some huge policy items, and then add into that the gun issue, which he did campaign on, and his campaign platform was a lengthy list of new gun proposals that he wanted to see enacted if elected president. But what he's doing right now is he's taking some initial unilateral steps, that is enacting or going to enact some executive orders on the gun issue, because he can do those on his own. They don't have to go to Congress. The only limitation is that because they are executive orders, they only pertain to departments of the executive branch, and that's why you can only go so far in that direction to change policy if you're the president. But what he's proposed, I think, are perfectly sensible and good things to do. They're not far-reaching, you might say, but I would say that heading the list is a proposal to reclassify what are called ghost guns. Right now, average people can purchase gun parts, assemble them at home pretty easily, and these parts have no serial numbers on them. And as a consequence, they're untraceable. And that is a significant problem. In 2019, roughly 10,000 ghost guns were retrieved from crime scenes. And here we are 2 years later. I have no doubt that that number is significantly greater than it was 2 years ago.
Is the ghost gun like the guns they can make on the 3D kind of replicators? Because those don't have serial numbers either, right?
That is right. It is possible to do metallic kind of 3D construction work with what you think of as 3D printers, but those kinds of guns that you think about being constructed with a 3D printers in recent years are made of polymers. And the problem with them is that they're virtually one-shot guns. That is, they can't withstand the force of numerous firings made from these polymers. So the more immediate and bigger threat is guns made from metal, and you can get those in the mail. That's the thing.
And make these, you can make a pistol, but you can also get something that they were calling a brace and turn it, it steadies your aim and allows you to do much more damage. But I want to push back a little bit on what many of us consider reasonable gun policy efforts, and ask, is that going to do it? Or do we have to have six more policy efforts or something? Because you can make it harder to get ghost guns. You can raise red flags. You can do all of these things. But is that going to change what has become an American mindset? I'm uncomfortable. I go out and I shoot up the mall. My girlfriend left me, and I go and shoot up something else.
Yeah, I mean, when you think about the totality of crime, 40,000 people die from guns in America every year. It's important to point out, by the way, that twice as many of those deaths are gun suicides as are gun homicides.
Isn't that horrible?
Yeah, and this is a good example where uniform policy could have a big effect. That is, if you require people to lock up their guns. It's such a simple thing. And even today, there is no advertising campaign. I mean, why doesn't something the National Rifle Association could do, right? The gun rights group. Where are there multi-million-dollar advertising campaigns on TV advising people, if you own a gun, make sure you lock it up? They advise people to do that, but there's no public service initiative. That's something that could be done with no government regulation. You could require locks. You could make sure that locks are sold with every gun. You could take more steps in those directions.
With the registration, you could require the locks. You teach at SUNY Cortland. And I want to, in your classes, when you're explaining, I don't know, I'm assuming that this comes up because of all the shootings. What legislation do you think about and talk to your students about that it's very pragmatic? Because what you're talking about is very practical.
Yeah. There are many practical things that could be done. Obviously, some of them would involve the government. But when you think about something like mass shootings, it tends to be a different sort of problem than, and I hate to say it this way, but than the typical shooting. Even though mass shootings receive a huge amount of attention, and for understandable reasons, they amount to about 1% of annual gun deaths. So that means there's 99% in a category other than mass shootings. But there's increasing research on mass shootings and shooters. Who are these people? Why do they do what they do? What could be done to stave off mass shootings? And that's where something like red flag laws come into play. And indeed, a number of mass shooters have been stopped because somebody called the police, somebody took us, went to school, told a principal, a friend told authorities. There are ways that you can bring those numbers down, but all of this has many causes. It's going to take time, and there are roughly 300 million guns in America, so the guns are not going away.
Well, could you, for our audience, go back and explain what the red flag? I think that's what Biden is going to make an executive order. I don't know how far executive orders go into states and whether states have to comply or not.
Well, the answer in this case would be no. What the Biden administration wants to do is draft a model red flag law that other states can adopt. It's a state-by-state decision. There is legislation in Congress to adopt a federal red flag law, but there again, you're facing Congress with very narrow majorities, especially in the Senate, where the division is 50-50, with the tie-breaking vote cast by the vice president. And the idea, though, is that given that 20 states, including some conservative states, have adopted red flag laws, that the federal government can at least encourage other states to do the same thing, and they can model on the federal template that the Biden administration wants to create. So here again, it's a small step. If they can get more states to adopt them, that would be a good thing. There have been studies of red flag laws, and they help, especially in preventing suicides. Again, less attention in the press, but a very important area where more can and perhaps is being done.
Well, I think also many of us, when I took constitutional law, I thought I was very clear on what the Second Amendment says. Now I'm not so clear anymore because it's being used to whip people all over the place. Can you tell us a little bit about the Second Amendment that will help give some clarity to what's going on?
Yeah, there's a difference between the historical understanding of the Second Amendment and the way it's been reinterpreted for contemporary law. The Second Amendment says a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Historically, it was clear what that meant. It meant that citizens had a right to own a gun for service in a government organized and regulated militia. That's it. And that's what the people who wrote the amendment said. That's how the courts had treated it for nearly 200 years. Then in 2008, along comes a more conservative Supreme Court, and they changed course, and they announced that they believe now this amendment, or the interpretation is, it now provides for a personal right of the average citizen to own a handgun for personal self-protection in the home. But even in that, that is an ahistorical reading, as virtually any reputable historian would tell you, and indeed said at the time. But even in that decision, they listed extensively the kinds of laws that would be allowable under that rubric. And basically what it amounts to is pretty much every law that is on the books and that is being debated now would be fine under that rubric. But the final step is that we now have a very, very much more conservative court, even than we had in 2008. And I'm firmly convinced that there is a 5 or even 6 member majority that's prepared to start rolling back existing gun laws that have previously withstood legal challenge and even blocking new laws that could be beneficial. And if that happens, and I just think it's going to happen sooner or later, that is going to really, gum up the idea of trying to address the gun problem through public policy. That's a prediction for the future. But I think that's kind of where we stand.
But when The Supreme Court gets to interpret, okay. But can it interpret so far away from the intention of what's actually there so that it causes harm to society? I mean, we could be, and we are obviously, a gun-toting society where civilians are shooting other civilians on the street and in mass at will.
Yes, and the Supreme Court obviously can interpret the law as it sees fit. They are the final authority, although the Constitution can be amended to change court doctrine. Even the regular legislative process in the past has been used to alter constitutional meaning and the direction of constitutional law. So the other branches of government can and do participate in that process. So there are, it's not necessarily the end of the story by any means, but in fact, the court has been heavily criticized, and rightly so, for claiming that they're doing originalist interpretation, what the founders meant, when in fact it really is the opposite of what the founders meant. And I would just add one point, which is I've done a lot of research on old gun laws. And the fact is that in our history, gun ownership is as old as America, but so are gun laws. And in our first 300 years, in many respects, guns were more strictly regulated than they have been in the last 30 years. And that's a story that too few people know.
Keep talking. I want to know more about what you're thinking here. You've
well,
got about a minute. It's all yours.
Well, you're very kind. When you looking at these old gun laws, in fact, it's work I've been doing very recently, and I have been shocked at the wide range and variety and strictness of old gun laws. And I mean, going back to the 1600s, we've seen demonstrations, in the last year where people bring guns to the state capitol because they want to make a statement. Right. And there were laws as early as the 1600s that barred citizens from gathering in groups more than 10 with guns. And if they didn't disperse in the space of a half an hour or an hour, they were subject to arrest. That was in the 1600s. And the reason why is the same reason today, because it scares people. And that has always been true in American law. And it's just one of many areas where we need to pay more attention to what our real past is.
Well, Professor Spitzer, we have learned a lot in a really small amount of time. So we'll have to get back to you because I know you're writing furiously. And thank you so much for being on Muslim Network TV.
I enjoyed speaking with you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Amina. As weapons on the streets increase, drone development has moved to the next phase. With single drones now commonplace, the next step is swarming drones. This technique engages hundreds or even thousands of drones in a swarm to accomplish a task. To learn about this technology and about the threats these swarms can pose for our security, let's go to Imam Abdul Malik Mujahid, who is in conversation with an expert.
Thank you, Hena Zuberi. Killing people is a big business. It took President Eisenhower a whole lot of time in the military until he became Supreme Commander, and 8 years of presidency of the United States of America before he talked about military-industrial complex. Well, that complex is becoming more complex. Drones are not new. But now there will be no one drone killing one person somewhere in Afghanistan who is dressed differently than us. There are going to be tens of thousands of drones flying together, communicating with each other, and they're calling it drone swarms. Interesting names. So probably it is already popping up on your video game screen. But that is going to be a weapon of mass destruction. And we will be talking about this from an expert who has written about it, and that is National Security Consultant Zach Canburn. Welcome to Muslim Network TV, Zach.
Thank you, and salam.
Peace be with you. Tell us, what is drone swarms?
Yeah, so the basic idea is that you have a large number of drones that are collaborating and communicating to make decisions about who exactly they target and where exactly they're going.
Wait a minute, they will be making a decision, or somebody sitting in the ground will be making decision for them?
So that's one of the big open questions, and it depends on what decision that actually is. So the big concern, of course, is whether the drone itself will actually target. So there is an increasing movement towards allowing autonomous weapons to make decisions about who to kill and who not to. There's an extensive and important international debate about what that means and whether that should be appropriate.
So is artificial intelligence playing a role if they have to make a decision about whether you will be killed or I will be killed?
So at the moment, that is not currently the case, but that's certainly where things are going. The challenge is if you have a large number of drones, say 1,000 or something of that sort, no human could make those decisions about who's an appropriate target or not, because the battlefield is so complex. There's constantly things moving around, people coming and going, that you simply can't keep up with that level of capability, which will end up potentially creating incentives for autonomous killing. Yes.
In your article, you talk about that the government is saying that, hey, we didn't do it. Students in MIT did that. What's the role of MIT in here?
Yeah, so not exactly. So that was a particular swarm, the PERDEX swarm, that was tested by the Department of Defense back in 2016. So that was originally designed by MIT students working out of Lincoln Labs, but it ultimately moved to Department of Defense contract. But the concern there is that if this technology is simple enough that students can create it, then it potentially is spreading throughout the globe.
Well, MIT until recently, until President Trump stopped it, MIT was contributing to artificial intelligence project, which were being used by Chinese company in collaboration with MIT to identify Uyghurs wherever they are and go after them in China.
hmm Yeah, I'm not aware of that specific program, but there is certainly been a wide range of programs throughout the Department of Defense that have attempted to are building towards increasing levels of autonomy and as well as the use of artificial intelligence across the military complex.
So is this a new competition between different countries that who will have a bigger swarms?
There is certainly some aspect to it. To what extent there's sort of the size of the swarm is itself a competition is a little bit unclear. Certainly, we've seen a number of very recent records being broken about just large numbers of drones being operated at once. So, just a couple days ago, China recently broke a record. I think it was 3,200 drones operating at once. Now, those were not armed; they weren't military drones. But the point being, like, the technology to have lots of drones operating at once is clearly here.
Hmm. So why operating it together versus operating separately makes a big difference?
Yeah, so the idea there is, first of all, you get sort of the benefits of mass, where you have so many drones that it potentially overwhelms the defenses of potential targets. Where currently capabilities are such that they can occasionally handle small numbers of drones, but they can't necessarily handle large amounts of force. Likewise, when you incorporate aspects of autonomy, you add complex behaviors into that, particularly where you may have drones that are operating with different types of weapon systems that, say, work together to decide what's the best approach to address a particular target.
American drones have been involved in killing people in Afghanistan, Yemen, Somalia, and different places, and they are being operated right here from the USA. But are these drone swarms, which is NEFARM, is it being field tested in anywhere?
So it's being tested, but not actually out in the field, to my knowledge, yet. And that's certainly a big question among us folks who are following this topic closely. Where will be the first usage? Because this technology is very new, I wouldn't expect it to sort of show up initially on the battlefield. But certainly, because it's moving so quickly and spreading so quickly. Certainly, there's potential across the globe anytime where it might show up.
Hmm. Why are you calling it a weapon of mass destruction? It's just a little drone, right?
Mhm. Not exactly. So it's a combination of basically the potential harm that could be caused, as well as the potential for uncontrollability. So weapons of mass destruction, most traditionally, are we're concerned about them because we have this massive amount of harm that's not readily controllable by any sort of military. That's a huge problem. So, for example, with chemical weapons agents, where a bad wind might blow the agent into an unsuspecting population, civilians, or into one's own military force, that's a huge problem. So, with drone swarms, where you have potentially up to thousands, if not tens of thousands, and potentially even millions of drones, though that's an extreme end, that level of harm, because you can't necessarily have control over that amount of drones, that creates significant risks. There's a petition going out where 4,000 or so experts in AI and robotics recognize that currently artificial intelligence is not sufficiently capable to make effective decision making on the battlefield over who's an appropriate target and who is not.
You mentioned chemical weapons, and probably we can add to that biological weapons. So drones going around equipped. I mean, just give us a worst possible scenario. If instead of COVID-19, which is still being investigated, whether it started from the Wuhan lab or it was just bypassed from animal to human being. So if someone decides to equip this drone swarms with biological weapons, what type of consequences you see there?
So yeah, equipping it with biological weapons would definitely be a major concern. I think that offers significant capability because one of the things you can do in that case is connect some of these drones with, say, target recognition and machine vision technologies, where you get very precise attacks on particular targets and spreading those biological weapons. And drones are potentially very effective delivery systems for that, because you can take to the air and more precisely target. Because part of the problem historically with biological weapons that they tend to spread all over the place, where you just sort of spray large quantities of the agent. But if you can more precisely target, that's potentially a major concern, and potentially has consequences for broader international norms against those weapons.
Biological weapons, there is a law, and U.S. law and international laws about that. But are there any laws about the drone warfare?
They're minimally. So the Missile Technology Control Regime does cover drones that carry upwards of, I believe it's 500 kilograms, or may not be remember exactly. But the main concern there is delivery of nuclear weapons. There's not currently, to my knowledge, any international treaties that specifically deal with drone swarms in the manner that I've discussed.
What about, I mean, if somebody has drones, for example, India here in your article you referred, they demonstrated a large swarm on their, whatever celebration they had of their military. Their neighbors, India developed atomic bombs, so Pakistan developed an atomic bomb. So how the people who are on the defensive side are thinking to counter drone swarms? There must be other type of technologies which are developing to defend yourself.
Yeah, so that's an open question about how exactly to defend. And unfortunately, yeah, it appears that there isn't really a particularly good answer. It seems one of the most promising is using microwave weapons, where you basically just sort of have very high-powered microwaves that destroy or damage the engines and the internal components to the actual drones. But how successfully those type of systems will be against massive swarms is very unclear.
Well, Zach, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you for having me. That was fun.
Thank you. Back to Hena Zuberi.
Thank you, Imam Mujahid. That's all from our Washington, D.C. studios tonight. Thank you so much for watching Muslim Network News. For more shows and updates, visit our website, muslimnetwork.tv. Good night and assalamu alaikum.